Welcome to the Inside Silverstone podcast, a business-focused podcast covering all things tech, engineering and innovation. Hosted by me, Chris Broome, a huge tech, motorsport and gaming fan, and also the owner of Longhurst, a firm of lifestyle financial planners and independent financial advisors located in Silverstone, Northamptonshire. This is a series of unscripted and unpolished conversations with leading business owners, thought leaders and high-tech talent where we discuss their experiences within the Silverstone business and motorsport region. We will also be asking them to share their knowledge, insight and their thoughts on the future just for you. If you're looking to learn more about the Silverstone high growth region and commercially connect with like-minded peers, you've definitely come to the right place. Welcome to Inside Silverstone. Welcome to the next edition of Inside Silverstone. My name is Chris Broome and I am your host today. I am delighted to finally welcome to the show James Southall, who is Head of Risk at Hexegic, which I think I've pronounced correctly. Is that right, James?
Just about.
Just about. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Right, James, as is customary, as I always open up these shows with, it'd be great if it's okay for me just to run through a quick snapshot of your sort of career background, just to basically show and explain to our dear listeners the sort of journey you've been on to eventually becoming head of risk at a business that's part of the Silverstone Technology Cluster. So is that okay if I quickly run through that?
Means, yeah.
So I grabbed all of this off trusted LinkedIn and Google, so if any of it's not right, please correct
it's
me.
my fault.
It was basically your fault, yeah, for noting it down incorrectly. Education-wise, went to the University of Wales. We did international politics and strategic degree.
Strategic studies, yeah.
Strategic studies, yeah. So the studies word wasn't on LinkedIn, so it just said strategic.
Oh, wasn't it?
No, so there we go.
Well, it was strategic studies.
Fine.
Or strategic not studies, and
there we are.
Maybe.
And that then led on to a career which lasted 16 years and 20 days, to be exact, in the military, where you were part of the Royal Artillery Regiment, with positions sort of ranging from intelligent officer through to battery commander and sort of senior operator within the 1st Intelligence, Surveillance and Reconnaissance Brigade.
That's right.
So, and then after that, 2016 to present, you then sort of left the military, which we'll come on to in a bit, where you started off as a sort of consultant turned head of risk at Hexegic, which was formerly known as Oculus.
That's right.
So, let's talk about the military, because in season 1 we had Stuart Pringle on, who was and is still managing director of Silverstone Circuits, literally just over the way from where we're recording the show right now. And so he was also in the military in the tank regiment. So, what's a guy who was in the Royal Artillery for nearly 20 years now doing out of the military, working as sort of head of risk? So talk to me about the sort of career in the military. Was that something that you, when you were growing up, you were sort of always fascinated by big guns and military operations and war games, or what was the sort of genesis behind that?
Yeah, when I was growing up, I think I watched Top Gun when I was at a fairly impressionable age, and I desperately wanted to be a fighter pilot.
Okay.
For most of my childhood, and then I was doing GCSE PE, and I was playing hockey one day early in the morning at school, and the sun was very low over the peaks, because I grew up near Manchester, so the Peak District, the hills of the Peak District used to sort of tower over the school, and there was a very low sun, and it got in the corner of my eye or something like that, and I suffered a migraine, and the migraine meant that I got funny vision, which is an immediate bar on flying, certainly flying in the military. So that was when that was finally came out in the various medicals I had. With the RAF, it turned out that I was never going to fly with them. So at that point, I thought, well, if I'm not going to fly in the Royal Air Force, I don't really want to be in the Royal Air Force. I don't want to be just in a supporting role. So I changed tack and looked at the Army. Actually, what I did was looked at the Army Air Corps initially to go and fly, helicopters and the Apache attack helicopter and all that. That's quite cool.
Nice.
And then the RAF told them about my medical that they'd given me. So that was off as well.
Couldn't sneak it through.
So at that point, I was kind of I'd always had an attraction to the artillery. When I was at university, I was briefly in the officer training corps. I was not by any means one of those types that goes to university and then spends all their time wearing combat uniform, it being part of the OTC. I, in fact, joined the OTC a little bit late. I missed selection.
What's the OTC?
Officer training corps.
Cool. Yep.
At university, and I didn't do any of the selection process for it or anything like that. But what transpired was that the Wales OTC, so it was all of the University of Wales, were going to the United States the following summer on a rugby tour.
Nice.
And they were lacking a fly half.
I thought when I met you, he looks like a fly half.
Did you? Thank you. Yeah, could have been worse.
I'm joking.
Could have been a lot worse, actually. You think about all the positions. So I kind of got recruited that way, and I did sufficient work, as it were, with the OTC over the following 10 months or so to give myself sufficient money to then go with them on the tour to the US.
Nice.
And that kind of actually is where my engagement with the OTC and with the Army at university kind of stopped. I went on the tour, had a whale of a time, and then didn't really go back because I didn't really think that there was going to be the military in my future at that point. And then I left university, and the thing I thought I was going to be doing, it transpired that probably wasn't going to work out. Okay. There was a chance that I was going to be a professional rugby player for a while.
There we are.
That's kind of what I did. That's what distracted me in my final year of university.
So you're obviously very good.
Well, I was all right, but I think the reason that I decided not to pursue it was because if I ever was going to make any money out of it, proper money, it was probably only going to be as a journeyman type player.
Right.
There wasn't a huge amount of money in the game at the time.
Sure.
There was some, certainly if you were, international standard, you could do really very well out of it. But I don't think I was going to be at that level. It was probably going to be, finding work, switching clubs quite a lot and all that sort of stuff. And that didn't really attract. So.
And even some of the most sort of senior players were working as solicitors, barristers, and were still working in industry and in a profession. So, yeah, understandable.
Yeah. So I kind of thought, well, I spent a bit of time at Sale Sharks. They were just Sale then, but now they're Sale Sharks. I spent a few months with them, and I got pretty fit, as you probably expect.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what am I going to do with an international politics and strategic studies degree? And now I have the ability to run relatively quickly and carry heavy stuff. So I thought I might join the army.
There it is.
And that's what I did. And I went off to Sandhurst, and having not done a lot of OTC at university and having, I guess, slightly odd thing to say, but having not been to boarding school, that was an experience. It took me a long time to realise that Sandhurst is primarily a bit of a game, as much as it is in military training and all of that. And I was in sort of the mindset that it was all terribly serious. And it took me a pretty long time, probably until well after I'd left, actually, to realise that I could have relaxed a bit.
Okay.
I didn't have to perhaps take it quite as seriously as I was.
Okay.
Because, I was trying to take it and view it as my profession.
Yeah.
But perhaps didn't mean to be quite as serious as all that.
Well, hindsight, right?
Hindsight, absolutely. 20/20 vision.
But you came through that. And then joined. So which regiment did you join first?
So I commissioned into the Gunners, into the Royal Artillery. You commission as an artillery officer, and then you flip between different regiments. So I left Sandhurst in December 2000, went to Lark Hill then on Salisbury Plain, which is where the Royal School of Artillery is based.
Okay.
I was there for about 5.5, 6 months. Learning how to be, as it turned out, an air defence troop commander.
Okay.
And there's some parallels here. So I ended up going to an air defence regiment because the air defence regiment in question was 22nd Regiment Royal Artillery, based in Curtin in Lindsey in North Lincolnshire, but they were called the Welsh Gunners, and they were a rugby regiment. And guess what they needed?
Fly half.
They needed a fly half.
Boom.
So that's where I went, and I wasn't given much choice. I was kind of posted there. You are allowed to put in sort of preference, performance, etc., as to where you might want to go, but I didn't really have much option. I was going to that regiment to play.
So for any aspiring chap or lady that is looking looking to get into the military, potentially to consider training as a fly half in rugby.
Well, any position would probably be all right.
Yeah. But for you, fly half, it worked. It paid off.
Yeah, it did. And in fact, my very first day in the regiment, you get at the end of a young officers course, certainly back then, you were then dined into the regiment at the Royal Artillery Mess in Woolwich, which is a fabulous palatial type building, and it's got what it did have. It's not an artillery mess anymore, but at the time, it had big paintings on the wall of all of the monarchs who had dined in that room.
Okay.
So it's quite atmospheric.
Yeah.
So that was where I was dined in. That was I think a Wednesday, something like that. Anyway, the following Thursday, I played for my new regiment in a cup final, in a sort of army cup final type thing. Gunner cup final, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. First thing I did.
Did the team win?
Yes.
There we are.
Yeah.
So your first game was in winning a cup.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. What a welcome to the regiment.
My career is over. Yeah, my work here is done.
Absolutely.
Oh my God.
And and that's kind of how you feel, I guess, at that point. And then as time goes on, you realise that perhaps that's not quite the case.
Sure.
You know,
but you're young.
But you're young. But you know, So I was in that regiment for 3 years.
Okay.
And I did an operational tour, if you can call it that, of Cyprus with the United Nations, as with that regiment, and I was in a visits officer role, which sounds really bizarre, but in Cyprus, because it's a UN tour, because of where it is, we were positioned in central Nicosia, which is the capital of Cyprus, and Cyprus is divided into the northern Cyprus and southern Cyprus. Or North Cyprus and Cyprus, the Republic of Cyprus in the south, and there was an invasion by the Turks in the early 70s, and so Nicosia is a divided capital city, the only one remaining in Europe now, and the island has a buffer zone, a UN monitored buffer zone through the middle of it. So we were patrolling that, and because we were right in Nicosia, there was a lot of interest in people coming and then walking through the buffer zone between the Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots. So I used to take tours through there probably twice a day, pretty much every day for 6 months, just showing them the different positions. And there's an old warehouse type building there, which was owned by a Toyota garage in northern Nicosia, I think, before the invasion. And certainly when I was there, it might be different now, but there were all these 1970s vintage cars.
Nice.
That were waiting delivery to the dealership, just sat there.
Pristine, gathering dust.
I wouldn't say they were pristine, but they were there, and they were certainly gathering dust. They were more dust than car. Yeah. But that was quite interesting. People used to like to come and do that, so that was my role.
Okay.
And whilst that was going on, whilst I was trolling up and down the Green Line, there was a war in Iraq. And that started at about that time. Okay. So that was after, obviously, 9/11. Yes. And I think 9/11 kind of, as for everybody in the military of my vintage, probably defined their careers as to what they then ended up doing. Okay. So what did you end up doing? So after my time with 22 Regiment in Kirton Lindsey, I was then posted on to 40 Regiment, which was based in Topcliffe in North Yorkshire, which is an old and kind of still current RAF base actually, and that was a tube artillery regiment, so classic artillery, big guns. And I was there for 4 years, and that included a tour of Iraq, Operation Telek, as Iraq was called, Operation Telek 9. And I was the intelligence officer for the battle group. Very sweet of you earlier, by the way, to say I was the intelligent officer. It was definitely not that. Intelligence officer. And the first half of the tour was in Shiba Logistics Base, also nicknamed by the military Shibetha, because it was fairly relaxed. And then the second half of the tour, lucky old me, I got to go with about 30 other guys from the regiment right into central Basra, and that was as the civil war was really reaching its climax, or certainly really ramping up in terms of intensity. And that was an interesting 3.5 months or so.
Yeah, that must have been high pressure, high alert. Yeah,
we were in the Provisional Joint Coordination Centre, joint because in this context we were working hand in glove with the Iraqis. So it was an Iraqi security forces base as well as more than it was a British base. And so, we had Iraqis all around us. They were all in uniform. But at that time, and everybody's probably aware now that the Civil War was split along many different lines. It was split along religious lines, Sunni Shia. It was split along tribal lines, and both of those things influence different people in the military and the police. So it was really hard to know who was actually friendly to us and who was hostile, even if they were wearing uniform. So that was quite an interesting period, quite intense. It was a really small base. Quite a few Iraqis sort of actually commuted in, normal work for them, but we lived there. But we were right in the middle of it all, with it all going on around us.
3 months.
For 3.5 months, yeah. I was newly married, so I got married just before we went to Iraq. And
she let you go, obviously.
Well, she didn't have a lot of choice. And then came home from that and really enjoyed the English summer.
I bet. Yeah, I bet. And so, 16 years, 20 days of a military career.
Yeah.
And then in 2015, 2016, you took a decision, big decision, life-changing decision to exit the military.
Yeah, well,
in part.
I left in January 2016, but I had to take the decision in January 15 because there's a huge notice period. So big decision to leave. It was for a whole variety of reasons, not least the family, not wanting to cause the kids to have to jump around schools, following me on various postings around the country, around the world. Didn't really want to put them into boarding school. That's not really what my wife and I had kids for. And probably just kind of thinking that maybe the time was right for a new challenge. That's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? But I think that's
not at all, right? Life is a combination of different journeys, and so you had your military journey. You obviously, became very experienced and knowledgeable. I would say you may, but clearly became a master in what you were doing, of course, and trusted. And so you then decided to bring that out into the commercial world, in part because, as you said, because of life planning, your own life planning, but try a new challenge. And so you then joined, presumably, what was then Oculus.
Actually, I didn't. The first thing I did on leaving the military was a couple of things. I got onto the Barclays military internship, which was run by Barclays in Canary Wharf, and that was a 3-month program. The year I was doing it, Barclaycard were running it, so we were all on the 13th floor of One Churchill Place in London, in Canary Wharf, learning all about what it was to be at Barclays and be in the city and be a civvy and all of that, which is a different environment. And I did it for a month.
How did that compare to Basra as an experience?
Surprisingly similar.
Very different.
No, extremely different. And of course, Basra, my goodness, that was 2006-07. So that was 10 years prior to me turning up at One Churchill Place. But I guess I kind of quickly realised that I didn't really want to work in the city. I think we live in Wiltshire, and people at my stage of life, if they have been in the city all that time, find themselves leaving the city and going and living out in the countryside. I was just about to propose doing the exact reverse. And so that didn't really fit with where we wanted to be, and the sort of lifestyle I wanted to have. Although I'm sure that the salary, etc., would have been potentially in time would have been great, but that salary is not everything. It doesn't make an entire life.
Sure.
And so I left that, and then I started scouting around for a job, and Christmas was coming, and another military program. I was then hired by Zurich Insurance in Swindon to be a project manager.
Okay.
And that was really, really very different to being in the military, and I found that extremely difficult. I found the culture of the organisation very hard to get my head around. And ultimately I was there for 6 months. And I left Zurich with nothing to go to. I just couldn't do it anymore. But to be perfectly honest, I had been in conversation with Oculus, as it was then, as Hexegic previously was, had been in conversation with Oculus, and I was kind of optimistic that something might be forthcoming, but I didn't know for sure. But as it turned out, it was very swiftly forthcoming. So I then joined Oculus as a consultant.
And so Oculus then, Hexegic today, who are they? Who are you? What do you guys do? And sort of...
Okay, so first thing, address the name change. That primarily came about because from when the company was first founded in 2009 to when the name changed in, last year, very start of last year, I think it was, 2018, the Oculus Rift virtual reality headset became a really big thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's owned by Facebook. And so we were a company called Oculus, and there's another one called Oculus, and they're backed by Facebook. So in any battle about who had the name first, there's only ever going to be one winner. And so it's probably worthwhile that the board decided to change the name.
Okay.
So that's how that came about. Hexegic, as I said, was founded in 2009. It was founded by a couple of guys who left the military, and the first thing they did, and it's still something the company is still doing today, was I guess a software hardware package that enables information that might have been collected, collated, understood by one coalition partner, let's say Germany, to hand that information to another coalition partner, let's say France, without losing the accuracy of the data that's been transferred. If you're in the military, it's pretty important that sometimes the sort of information that you might be passing from one to the other has to be right, because if it's not right, the consequences can be bad, shall we say? Yeah, diplomatically. Can be difficult, and so it's really important that that's right. And the company came up with a solution. The founding guys came up with an idea to solve that problem. And as I say, the team recently won the contract again for another 2 years running forward. So that's kind of been a thread that's run throughout Oculus and now Hexegic.
So that's a bit of software.
It's a kind of software hardware package. It's interoperability and validation, it's called. And it enables interoperability between different states, as it turns out in this case, between different militaries, and also validates that information, make sure that it is correct. Quite important if you're a NATO country, because all the different countries in NATO all procure their own different communication systems, but then they've all got to work together. So they've all got to have a plug in and then a plug out, and that's what this system provides.
And what else? What, you guys got any other sort of solutions that might be relevant for the sort of STC and Silverstone Park, and why you guys are sort of here? So this is a barrier model.
So I'm head of risk, and I guess, how do I feel about that title? I'm somewhat awkward about that title because, having done a brief glimpse into financial services with Barclays and then with Zurich, I know that financial risk is already a really, really well-serviced marketplace. That's kind of not what we do. What in the last 10 years or so of my time in the army, I spent my focus was on remotely piloted aircraft systems, RPAS, also known as unmanned aircraft systems, unmanned aircraft vehicles, and also as drones. So that's what I did for about 10 years. I took a battery of about 185 people to Afghanistan to do that. We did that. My turn of the handle was 2012 into 2013. And in doing that, and then becoming the senior operator after that of Army RPAS, I got really heavily involved in the whole risk management piece, understanding how aviation risk management is conducted in the military, and it's very similar to how aviation risk management is conducted in the civilian world as well, civilian aviation world. And so I came across a product or a sort of methodology when I was doing the risk management for the aircraft, which is called a bow tie. And a bow tie risk management methodology is basically a barrier model of risk. So it's kind of visual. So it helps people to understand the risk they're holding. So instead of, for example, having an enormous, great big risk register on Excel or whatever other program you might choose to create it on, where there is a huge amount of detail, which is good, but you can't see the wood for the trees. You literally can't see it. You dive into that spreadsheet and you've come up for air occasionally and then dive back in. But it's really hard to understand actually from the data that's in that spreadsheet, actually what risk am I actually holding. Bow tie is a method of visualizing it.
Okay.
Literally paint you a picture, and we all know what pictures are good for. And so I kind of had this, had that methodology in my mind for a good long time actually. When I was after leaving the military, and then I mentioned it. I did a PowerPoint presentation. I remember at Barclays on it, trying to think, I could jump across maybe into the risk space there, and it didn't really gain any traction. And I did a similar thing at Zurich, and it again didn't really gain any traction. But I still thought there's something in here, something in this perhaps. And then I joined Hexegic, and the reason I was hired was because there was a contract coming up to support a military RPAS project, remotely piloted aircraft system project, and so I started doing that, and that turned out to be for 3 days a week. Recently reduced down to 2 days a week. I still do it, still support the army a couple of days a week. But I had a bit of spare time, and so I kind of began to develop this idea. And I remember it clearly. I was actually ironing a shirt one day. Us ex-military types love to iron. Love to iron our shirts and everything, obviously.
Yeah.
So I was ironing a shirt one day, and I had this blinding flash of inspiration. And I thought, what about if we could create a piece of software that enabled somebody to be presented with a bow tie diagram without having to go through the enormous pain of building it themselves. Because it is really difficult to build a bow tie diagram. It takes a huge amount of effort and quite a lot of expertise in the methodology itself, but also in terms of risk and in terms of the risk you're trying to manage, because you have to come up with all the different aspects of the bow tie diagram. So I should probably explain they're called bow ties because when they're completed, they look a little bit like a bow tie.
Okay.
That's the only reason that they have that name. A bow tie diagram, as I said, is one of many barrier models out there. I think it's pretty effective. The Civil Aviation Authority say it's very effective. It's their preferred barrier model. In the middle of it, you put a hazard, which is something that is an intrinsic part of the business. So, for example, for an airline, that would be you've got to put airliners in the sky. That hazardous activity, but you've got to do it, otherwise you haven't got a business. So that's the hazard. Then you have, straight underneath that, you have a thing called the top event. And the top event is something which releases the hazard into the world. What might that be? Let's park that for a moment. On the left-hand side of the diagram, you then draw a series of threats. And threats are those things that could cause the top event to be released. So the threat causes the hazard to suddenly become a problem. And then on the right-hand side of the diagram, you have consequences. And those are things that actually result from the hazard then actually being released out into the world and something bad happening. When the hazard is released, nothing at that moment bad has happened, but the potential for something bad to happen has been realised. The top event is also sometimes called, that's the centre of the diagram, it's also sometimes called a loss of control event. So that's when you are now out of control of whatever your hazard might be. So it might be liquid petroleum gas stored in a container. Well, if that gas leaves that container, you now have an uncontrolled hazard. And then that can have a consequence. So now, if in your mind you now have a picture of something that looks a bit like a bow tie, it has a central knot that is the hazard and top event. On the left-hand side you have a series of threats, and on the right-hand side you have a series of consequences. Now, if you imagine a line being drawn from each of those threats into the top event and from the top event out to each of the consequences, you can see that you're beginning to draw a picture.
Yep.
On each of those lines, you then put barriers or controls. And the idea behind those barriers or controls are that they will stop the threat resulting in the top event.
Yes.
And they will stop the top event resulting in the consequence on the other side of the bow tie. And I had that's a long-winded explanation, isn't it? Sorry.
That's all right. It's good.
I had an idea that wouldn't it be great if, for another problem, we were able to build a piece of software that we could then populate with our own knowledge, so we could that bare bones chassis, whatever you want to say, of the bow tie then exists, and all we have to do then is pose a series of questions to the client organisation, and their responses to those questions will then populate that diagram.
Yep.
And we will be able to say to them, you know what, in that barrier there, that one's green because that's quite good. You're quite good at that one. That one there is red because you're not very good at that. That one doesn't exist at all because you haven't not doing anything there. That one's amber, etc., etc. And so over the diagram, you then have all these different colours, and you can then see how good or bad you might be about managing that particular threat, that particular hazard. And then you think, well, okay, so what are the problems out there facing the world, and what expertise do we have? My initial idea was, let's do it for drones. Let's take all this drone knowledge I have about managing drone risk in the military, and take it out there into the civilian drone sector and help small drone operators manage their risk and become safer.
Or airports like Gatwick.
Well, they already do it. They already do it. Maybe not for drones so well, but they do it in terms of managing aviation risk.
Sure.
But then we kind of had, we had another thought. Well, okay, how big is the drone market? How many drone operators are out there that are going to pay us a reasonable amount of cash for this amazing product we've just created? Probably not that many. How many companies, how many organisations out there should be concerned about cybersecurity? All of them. Ooh, right, okay, that's a much bigger market, isn't it? It's a much bigger market. Every organisation probably has to be connected to the internet these days. Every organisation needs IT. So they're all at risk from cybersecurity threats.
And so what Hexegic have done is taken a background which has been supporting sort of government, backed institutions of government, UN, etc., through to sort of commercial space where you're going to help protect against cyber.
Yeah, so we smashed the risk methodology I've just been waxing lyrical about. We smashed that together with the expertise of some of the other guys in the team, which is definitely about cybersecurity. Yeah. Put the two things together, and you come out with a cybersecurity bow tie software tool.
And what makes that and you guys different to any other cyber company out there?
Well, I think risk management and risk management as it's done in aviation, as it's done in other hazardous industries such as oil and gas. Bowtie actually came out of the oil and gas industry. The risk management methodologies they have are designed for fairly dynamic situations, dynamic environments. If you're flying an aircraft or you're dealing with oil or gas or whatever it might be, the energy sector, it's relatively dangerous and things can go wrong relatively quickly, and the systems that are in place to manage that are all quite complicated. So in effect that happens in one place, you can very quickly then see how that then has an impact in somewhere where you wouldn't necessarily expect it to do so. So that's a complex system that I've just described. Cybersecurity is the same. The threat is dynamic, it's changing, and there are people out there, as opposed to normal financial risk where or supply chain risk. So if the engines don't arrive at the car factory on time, there will then be a financial implication of that. But that's relatively static. You can kind of quantify that quite easily. Can you quantify the risk that is posed by a hacker deliberately targeting your systems to steal your data? Do you know what that's going to look like? Can you quantify that risk? arguably not unless you spend a huge amount of resource doing so. And so you kind of need to understand what is the risk in qualitative terms, and that's what Bowtie is really good for.
Okay.
And I think what we are trying to do is help organisations that perhaps traditionally wouldn't be able to afford a huge amount of cybersecurity consultation, etc., from maybe one of the big security defence primes to come in and help them manage their cybersecurity. They're not able to afford that. It wouldn't be appropriate for them to do it. But nevertheless, they still need to understand what the risk might be and how good their cybersecurity posture is and what they can do to improve their position.
And your solution can deliver that. So to SMEs who, as you've said, might not be able to sort of recruit or pay extortionate amounts of money to get cybersecurity team in, you've built a solution which actually would fit into their...
So a solution, it's about helping the organisation to understand its cybersecurity posture and then what they can do to improve it. And it's what we're really conscious of is the fact that if you are not an expert, and I am not an expert in cybersecurity, so I feel everybody's pain in this. If you are not an expert, then trying to understand simply where to begin is really hard. And you are presented with, you need to do all of this, and you're presented with a huge, massive list of stuff that you've got to get on with. That, by the way, is not it's not the main effort of your organisation. It's just something that you've just kind of got to do in amongst also keeping the organisation afloat and running and producing what you set out to do in the first place. And so we've got to make that easier for people and for organisations, and that's kind of what we set out to do. So the product takes about 90 minutes to run through the questionnaire, and we send one of our consultants to whichever organisation is the client, and they run through the questionnaire with them, and then at the end of that you then get a picture that tells you what your posture is. There's a huge amount of detail that you can get out of the picture if you need to, but fundamentally if you want to just show it to, the CEO, you can show him the picture and you can say, you know what, we're bad in these areas, we're good in these areas, and this is where we need to invest. So we give you the picture, and then we give you, we agree with you a prioritised list, a prioritised action plan. And the idea behind that is that let's just take this in bite-sized chunks. Let's just consider what you're going to do, what you should do, what would be most efficient and effective for you to do over the next 6 months, for example. Do that. Then 6 months later, maybe have another look and do something else, or do a selection of other things. And I think one of the great benefits of the barrier model, of the Bowtie barrier model, is that it shows you where you would be most wise to invest. If you just have a massive spreadsheet, which then has a series of reds and ambers and greens on it, you kind of think, well, I'll just do all the reds. How about I started all the reds? Or I might choose to turn all the ambers green. Both valid approaches. Which one's right? I don't know. But how do those risks actually interlink? How do those controls, or the red, amber, green elements on your spreadsheet, how do they actually interact with each other? And if you were to turn all of your reds green, A, would that be economically achievable? And B, actually, would you actually just be reinforcing areas where you are already relatively strong and leaving other areas weak? And so the Bowtie diagram that we would draw for you really helps organisations to understand where they need to spend their resource initially. So let's not just concentrate on one pillar of cybersecurity. So let's say if we take the National Cybersecurity Centre, they have a concept called the 10 steps. It is 10 steps. They have a concept called the 10 steps. So there's 10 things that you should be doing. And that's really good. That's really good guidance, and I recommend it to anybody. But if you look at it from a slightly less expert point of view, you might choose to just concentrate on 1 or 2 or 3 of those elements, of those pillars. But that leaves 9 or 8 or 7 of the other elements completely undefended. And you won't necessarily recognise that. And you'll think, because you've invested all this resource in making that pillar good, so you're now protected, you've got good malware protection, for example, that's great, you've got good malware protection, but what about all the other things that could go wrong? You haven't done anything about those, so you're not really any better defended than you were originally.
And so your solution will visually show them strengths, weaknesses, so that they can then, with your support and consultancy services, prioritise which to go at first, and then which to sort of strategically go at months moving forward, then etc.
Exactly. It's a first step.
Yeah.
Let's help organisations to understand how good their cybersecurity posture is. Okay. Once we're in that position, now let's understand what you should do as an immediate action.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can start thinking about helping you to design a cyber strategy. So you can look forward 3 years and say, okay, we will be in 3 years' time. We will be defended. We'll have a good number of greens and ambers across all these different threats. But right now, we're just going to get to ourselves so we've at least got some defence across all of them, and we'll just improve it as time goes on.
Okay. Thank you. That's detailed, very good explanation about that solution and where Hexegic can sort of plug into to local SMEs. And so we're recording this podcast in the Innovation Centre on Silverstone Park. Hexegic are a member of the Silverstone Technology Cluster, as is my business Longhurst. So why did Hexegic join the STC, and what's sort of been the experience to date?
So I think that the first reason was because we're relatively close by. So the company has its office in Bloxham Mill, which is not too far away at all. So that was kind of reason one. We're kind of in this area. Yeah. Reason two was because my goodness isn't British motorsport world renowned. And I'm a little bit of a car buff. Probably in these environments, probably not so much. Wouldn't compete with people, but I kind of like all of that. And you see the names around here, Brackley and Silverstone, etc. And you know that the majority of the world's F1 teams are right here. Yeah. So it's quite good to be part of some. Silverstone is known as a brand, as a name worldwide. Yeah. Certainly well known in the UK. It's really good to be attached to something like that. That has, if you say Silverstone to virtually anybody out there, they're going to think of motor racing and Formula One and a high-tech sort of industry that brings with it, the high-tech image that brings with it. That's something that we think is really useful to be part of. Yeah, agreed. Really attractive brand. And I think the third point is that a lot of the organisations in the Silverstone Technology Cluster are involved in not just the motorsport world, but the automotive world. But just taking motorsport for one moment, organisations involved in motorsport have to be agile. They have to make decisions quickly, and they have to back themselves, I suppose. And if we can show our product to organisations like that, and then receive feedback on it from those organisations, and our experience so far is that they are not afraid to give it. That's really useful, really powerful. You are not going to a corporate behemoth where you might get some sort of considered opinion out of them if you're lucky within the next 6 months. These guys will give it to you face to face, and they will also give you that feedback when you ask for it over email or something like that. And it will be considered, because a lot of them are engineers, and it will be bullet pointed, and it will be to the point, and that's really valuable. Okay. I think I'm going to move on to the last few questions, if that's okay, James. We're 42 minutes in. Are we? Hasn't that gone quickly? Because I've been talking all the time. Well, but it's good. So we're covering military. We're covering tours overseas. We're covering life plan change, where you then went into sort of industry, as it were. We've spoken about Oculus, its evolution, name change into Hexegic. Touched very briefly. There's obviously a number of other things that you guys do, but we're obviously focusing on a specific product now, which is great, and how that can certainly help business owners and businesses that are listening to this podcast, which is great. We've touched on the STC very briefly. Let's close off with two of my favourite questions. Okay. Well, there's three questions. So the middle question is always, is there anything I haven't asked you that we should cover off? So is there anything that sort of sparked that you think, can we come back to that one? We can put that one as question 3. We can put that back as question 3, of course. First question then. Embarrassing mistakes. So there must be something in James Southall's locker, military locker perhaps, where something's happened, professionally, personally,
that's funny, embarrassing, that we could sort of share with our listeners so that we could all laugh but also reflect and think, oh yeah, that's easily done, or not. So anything that you'd be prepared to share with us?
So I told you a story just before we started this that I thought would be appropriate for this, but I think I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to talk about a different one.
Okay.
And it was when I was on exercise in Belize.
Okay.
Down in Central America.
Yeah.
Quite a fascinating place because there's jungle there. So we spent a week in the jungle.
Okay.
Which I didn't particularly like. It was jolly hot and a bit wet and damp and but we didn't have to do anything that was particularly arduous when we were there. We weren't there for that. We were there more for the experience than anything else. So it was a bit like combat camping, really.
Okay.
And I remember lying in my hammock that I'd built. That mine didn't collapse. Some of them did. That was quite funny. You hear big Fijians thumping to the floor in the middle of the night. Always quite amusing. But lying in the hammock and watching all the the flies that glow. Glow. What are they? What are they called? Not glowworms because they're flies, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I had my head torch on reading a book, and they're attracted to the light, and they come in and they glow bright green. Anyway, that's not the story at all. That was just about Belize. So we did the jungle bit, and then we were extracted out of the jungle, and we were sent up to a range in Belize called Baldy Beacon. Baldy because there's no trees on it, I think. And we were practicing artillery, and I at the time was a forward observation officer, which is kind of the front end. So I canter around with the infantry, and I am responsible then for calling artillery onto the fires that they want artillery to strike, so that they can then assault the position or whatever it might be. And so we were just practicing the artillery stuff, and I had an instructor of gunnery next to me, and he told me to try and hit a certain target out on the range. And so I started trying to hit this target out on the range with the gun. So I was sort of giving adjustments, left a bit, up a bit, down a bit, right a bit, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And the instructor gunnery next to me couldn't understand what on earth I was trying to do. And he was looking at me like I was an absolute idiot, which was not entirely removed from the truth. But he was looking at me like I was an idiot, and I was looking at him like he was an idiot. And it transpired that we hadn't actually identified the target correctly between us.
Right.
And he had told me to shoot at one thing, and I had interpreted it as shoot at a completely different thing.
Okay.
And so I think the lesson I learned from that was that if you are passing information over to somebody, make sure that they absolutely get the information you're passing over. And in the military, there's a term, the back brief, and get them to back brief it to you. Just a confirmatory brief, just to make sure that they are actually going to, hit the right target or achieve the right aim.
But did you hit the actual target you were aiming for?
I think I hit the target I was aiming for. I didn't hit the target he thought I was aiming for. And then it just all got really complicated. And I think ultimately we just kind of sacked it and just went to bed.
Fine, great story. Second from last question is something that I've changed. The first season it was always about what sort of life advice could you give me, Chris Broome? I'm the host of Being Selfish. What can I learn from you?
Nothing.
Lots. I can learn lots. But season 2, we know we've got students listening to this, certainly in the local sort of tech and SICK forms, tech colleges and SICK forms. And so the question that I'm asking everyone now is, 20-year, 25-year career, ranging from sort of military into industry, master in your field, you'd say you're not, but you clearly are. If you were to go back to a much younger self, no stress, naive, green behind, wet behind the ears, a little bit green, what bit of advice would you give yourself that would carry you sort of success moving forward?
I think it would probably be a combination of two things. I think I would probably say, this might sound cliched, sorry. I say probably dare to dream. Yeah. And then do all that you can then to follow those dreams. Yeah. And you know what? If one doesn't work out, then don't completely abandon don't completely abandon it, but look for a different tack. Yeah. And just pursue it in a different way. And I think if you do that, and you really go for it, really throw yourself at it, then when you reach the stage of life that you and I are at, you will look back with pride and with happiness at what you've done. So I would say, probably the first one is just dare to dream, and then absolutely pursue it as relentlessly as you can. And the second one, I think, which might sound as if it's contrary to the first, would be, and don't take things too seriously.
Yeah.
Try and relax to a degree, and you'll know where you are on the spectrum of very intense to very relaxed. But if you are towards the more intense end, try and relax a bit. Don't overly think. Don't overthink things. Don't worry overly about stuff, and just try and enjoy life's journey as much as you can. If you're towards the more relaxed element, then maybe put a rocket up yourself and get on with
it. Fine. Sage advice, James. Thank you so much for that. So message there is, find something you're passionate about and do everything you possibly can to follow that dream. And if you hit sort of bumps and hurdles along the way, just pivot, and continue, but try and find another avenue to potentially follow.
I think so. I've heard an expression before in the military. It's all to do with surfaces and gaps. So if you're trying to achieve an aim, there will be obstacles in your way. Some of them will be surfaces, hard surfaces that you'll bang into, and you can keep banging your head against that brick wall if you want, or you can look for the gap to the side of it and go through the gap. It might not be exactly on the exact path that you originally planned, but ultimately it will probably get you there. It will get you to your aim in the end. So look for the gaps. Don't just crash into the surfaces all the time.
There it is. Last question.
Oh, yes.
Which you asked me to move to the end.
Yes,
which is,
didn't I? Because I couldn't think of anything.
Is there anything?
Still can't.
And there probably isn't, which means we've covered everything off. Are you happy with the interview? Anything else we want to talk about?
No, you've kind of spoken a lot about everybody's favourite subject, which is themselves. I guess there probably isn't. I guess the final thing I would say about cybersecurity, and I am really not an expert, and I think I've spoken at an STC event before, all to do with connected vehicles, and I think anybody who attended that would really know that I'm not an expert in cybersecurity. But I would say to people out there who might be at the moment ignoring it, or might be at the moment trying to be an ostrich about it, put your head in the sand and stuff, please don't necessarily engage with us, but start to do something about your cybersecurity posture, because a lot of the businesses, certainly a lot of the businesses in the STC, will have stuff that is of value to nefarious actors, and I would urge people really to just take a moment to consider what they are doing to protect themselves, to protect their employees, to protect their business.
Good. I'm going to close the show by saying I think you're doing yourself a disservice by saying you're not an expert. The truth is that you've taken 16 years and 20 days experience of working in the military, working within an area of identifying risk, to then come into a commercial sector where you've become head of risk within an organisation that's producing software, which in part has taken an avenue down cyber, with a solution based on some of your ideas. So I think by virtue, you kind of are. But I'm going to close the show with that. So, James, wonderful. Thank you for coming on. I really, really enjoyed that. I hope all our listeners did as well. In due time, we'd love to get you back on, and so we'll see whether or not we can do that, maybe collaboratively with one or two other of the STC members.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Bye.
The Inside Silverstone podcast is produced by the team at Longhurst for the benefit of those with a passion for all things tech, engineering and innovation. For more information, please visit longhurst.co.uk/Inside Silverstone, whilst also remembering to give us a 5 out of 5 star rating on iTunes. Please note that neither Chris Broome or Longhurst work for Silverstone Park, Silverstone Circuit or Silverstone Technology Cluster.